At 4:47 in the morning, I heard my name being screamed from outside my house. Cordelia! Cordelia! Open this damn door! Colton's voice tore through the darkness like something feral, something unhinged. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, but not from fear. No, what I felt was closer to grim confirmation. I had known this moment was coming. I had prepared for it. And still, hearing my son-in-law's voice twisted with that kind of rage made my stomach turn. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. 4:47 a.m. glowed on the screen. 3 days ago, I had changed every lock in this house. 3 days ago, I had finally drawn a line that Colton Stratton could not cross. And now, in the cold darkness of a November morning, he had come to make me pay for it. "I know you're in there," he shouted. "Open the door, Cordelia. We need to talk." I slipped out of bed and moved to the window, careful to stay in the shadows. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see his car parked crookedly in my driveway, the driver's door still hanging open. He was pacing on my front porch like a caged animal, his breath visible in the cold air. "My name is Cordelia Thornwood. I am 58 years old. I built a design company from nothing and sold it for $14 million. I raised a daughter, loved a husband for 32 years, and buried him 4 years ago. I have faced difficult clients, impossible deadlines, and the kind of grief that makes you wonder if you will ever feel whole again. But I had never faced anything like Colton. Cordelia!" His fist hammered against my front door. "Don't ignore me. I'm not leaving until we settle this." I picked up my phone and sent a text message. Just 2 words. "He's here." The reply came instantly. "Stay inside. I'm coming." For 2 years, I had watched my daughter Adrienne disappear into her marriage with this man. For 2 years, I had bitten my tongue, swallowed my concerns, and tried to be the supportive mother who didn't interfere. I had watched my vibrant, creative daughter become a shadow of herself, isolated from friends, working from home, slowly convinced that I was the problem, that I was controlling, that I couldn't accept her happiness. Colton was good at that. He was good at taking reality and twisting it just enough that you started to doubt yourself. He had done it to Adrienne for 7 years. He had tried to do it to me, but I had stopped playing his game. The pounding on my door continued, each blow making the frame shudder. I thought about my grandson Nolan, just 5 years old, with his curly brown hair and his grandmother's eyes. I thought about how he used to ask me why he couldn't sleep at Grandma's big house anymore. I thought about the confused hurt in his voice when I couldn't give him an answer he could understand. This was for him. This was for Adrienne. This was for the family that Colton had systematically torn apart while smiling at holiday dinners and calling me Mom. "Last chance, Cordelia." His voice had changed now, dropping to something colder. "Open this door, or I swear to God I'll open it myself." I heard his footsteps retreat from the porch. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that he was leaving, that he had come to his senses, that whatever desperate fury had driven him here at this hour had finally burned itself out. Then I heard his car trunk slam shut. I moved to the side window that overlooked the driveway, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Colton was walking back toward my house, and in his hands he carried a sledgehammer. His face in the porch light was set with a determination I had never seen before. This was not the charming man who had swept my daughter off her feet at a charity gala. This was not the smooth-talking son-in-law who always knew the right thing to say. This was someone desperate, someone dangerous, someone who had finally run out of lies to tell and games to play. "I'm giving you 10 seconds, he shouted, positioning himself in front of my door. 10 seconds, Cordelia, and then I'm coming in whether you like it or not." My hands were shaking as I gripped my phone. I thought about calling 911, but I knew that by the time they arrived, my beautiful oak door would be splinters on the floor. I thought about confronting him myself, opening the door and demanding he leave, but I could see the wildness in his eyes even from here. This was not a man who could be reasoned with tonight. 10, 9, 8. I had spent 58 years solving problems, building a business, navigating difficult personalities, finding solutions where others saw only obstacles. But standing in my own home, listening to my son-in-law count down to violence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Complete helplessness. 7, 6, 5. Where were the police? Where was Edmund? How had it come to this, that I was barricaded in the house my husband and I had built together, waiting for a man who was supposed to be family to break down my door? 4, 3, 2. I closed my eyes. I thought of Jeffrey, my husband, gone 4 years now. I thought of his steady hands and his calm voice and the way he always knew exactly what to do in a crisis. I would have given anything to have him beside me in that moment. 1. Colton raised the sledgehammer above his head. I could see his muscles tensing, could see the trajectory of the swing that would shatter my door and everything it represented. And in that frozen second, I heard a voice behind me. "Let me handle this." I spun around. Edmund Merritt stood in my living room, having come through the back door that I had left unlocked for exactly this purpose. He was 61 years old, 6'4", with close-cropped white hair, and the kind of steady gaze that comes from 32 years as a detective. He had been my neighbor for 28 years and Jeffrey's closest friend. "Edmund," I breathed. "He has a—" "I know." Edmund moved past me toward the front door, with a calm that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. "I've already called it in. 2 units are on their way." Outside, I heard the sledgehammer begin its descent. But before it could connect with my door, Edmund reached out and pulled it open. The sledgehammer swung through empty air where solid wood should have been, and Colton stumbled forward from the momentum, nearly falling into my foyer. He caught himself at the last second and looked up, and in that moment, I watched every ounce of color drain from his face. He had expected to find a 58-year-old woman alone and vulnerable. Instead, he found Edmund Merritt filling the doorway like a wall of quiet authority, his silver badge from his retirement ceremony still hanging on a chain around his neck. And behind Edmund, visible now through the early morning darkness, 2 police cruisers were pulling into my driveway, their lights beginning to flash. The sledgehammer clattered to my porch floor. "Colton Stratton," Edmund said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of reading rights and making arrests. "I think you should put your hands where I can see them." I watched my son-in-law's face cycle through a dozen emotions in the span of seconds. Shock, fear, desperation, and finally, something that might have been the first genuine emotion I had ever seen from him. Pure, undiluted panic. "This isn't what it looks like," Colton stammered, backing away from the door. "I was just trying to talk to her. She changed the locks. She won't let me see my own son. She's been poisoning Adrian against me." "Save it." Edmund stepped onto the porch as the first officer approached. "Everything from the moment you pulled into this driveway has been recorded. The cameras caught it all." I moved to stand beside Edmund, looking at the man who had spent 7 years systematically dismantling my daughter's sense of self. He looked smaller now somehow, diminished. The expensive suit he usually wore was replaced by wrinkled clothes that smelled of alcohol. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled. His hands, which he had raised in surrender, were trembling. "Mrs. Thornwood," one of the officers said, a young woman with a notepad already in hand. "Are you all right? Can you tell me what happened here?" I took a deep breath. For 2 years, I had been silent. For 2 years, I had tried to handle this privately, to protect Adrian from the truth, to give Colton chances he didn't deserve because I kept hoping I was wrong about him. I was done being silent. "His name is Colton Stratton," I said, my voice steady despite everything. "He's my son-in-law. 3 days ago, I changed my locks after he showed up at my home intoxicated and made threats. Tonight, he returned at 4:47 a.m., demanded entry, and when I refused, he retrieved a sledgehammer from his vehicle and threatened to break down my door." "That's a lie!" Colton shouted, but another officer was already approaching him with handcuffs. "She's lying. She's been trying to destroy my marriage for years. Sir, you need to calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down. You don't understand what she's done to my family." I watched as they handcuffed him, as they read him his rights, as they walked him toward the waiting cruiser, and I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not yet, but something like the first crack of dawn after a very long night. Edmund placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Cordelia." "Did I?" I asked, still watching Colton being placed in the back of the police car. "Or did I just destroy my daughter's life?" "He destroyed it," Edmund said firmly. "You're just finally turning on the lights." Headlights swept across my driveway as another car pulled in, and my heart clenched when I recognized it. It was Adrian's silver Honda, the one Colton had insisted she buy because it was sensible for a mother. She got out of the car before it had fully stopped, her face streaked with tears and twisted with confusion. "Mom? What's going on? Colton called me. He said you were having some kind of breakdown. He said I needed to come get him." She stopped when she saw the police cars. She stopped when she saw her husband in handcuffs in the back of a cruiser. She stopped when she saw the sledgehammer still lying on my porch. "Adrian," I said, moving toward her. "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me. What did you do?" Her voice was rising, panic setting in. "Mom, what did you do to him?" "I didn't do anything. He came here at almost 5 a.m. with a sledgehammer. He was going to break down my door." "No." She was shaking her head, backing away from me. "No, that doesn't make sense. Colton wouldn't do that. He was worried about you. He said you'd been acting erratic. He said—" "Adrian." Edmund stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "I have it all on camera. Every moment, from when he pulled into the driveway to when he raised that hammer. Would you like to see?" My daughter looked at Edmund, then at me, then at the police car where her husband sat with his head bowed. I could see the war happening behind her eyes, the desperate need to believe the story she had been told versus the evidence right in front of her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I don't understand any of this." I reached out and took her hands in mine. They were ice cold, trembling. "I know you don't, sweetheart. And I know this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever had to hear. But there are things about Colton. Things I should have told you a long time ago. Things I was too afraid to say because I didn't want to push you away." The tears were flowing freely down her face now. "Mom, you're scaring me. I know, and I'm sorry. But I need you to come inside. I need you to see what Edmund has found. And then I need you to make your own decision about what happens next." Adrian looked once more at the police car, at the man she had married, at the father of her child, and then she turned back to me with something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Trust. "Okay," she said quietly. "Show me." As we walked into my house, the house that Jeffrey and I had built together, the house where I had raised my daughter and celebrated holidays and grieved my husband, I felt the weight of what was about to happen settle onto my shoulders. I was about to shatter my daughter's world. I was about to show her that the man she loved, the man she had chosen, the man she had defended against me for years, was not who she thought he was. But as Edmund had said, Colton destroyed her life. I was just finally turning on the lights. The sun was beginning to rise over Greenwich, painting my windows with shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in my neighborhood, other families were waking up to ordinary mornings, ordinary problems, ordinary lives. But in my living room, my daughter sat on my sofa with her hands clasped in her lap, waiting to learn that her entire marriage had been built on lies. I sat down beside her and took her hand. "It started 18 months ago," I began, when my lawyer Bernard called me with some disturbing news. "My name is Cordelia Thornwood, and for most of my life, I believed that hard work, integrity, and love were enough to build a happy family. I met Jeffrey when I was 22 years old, fresh out of design school with a head full of dreams and a portfolio that I carried everywhere like a sacred text. He was a young lawyer then, working 80-hour weeks at a firm in Manhattan, and we collided quite literally at a coffee shop in Greenwich Village when I wasn't looking where I was going and he wasn't looking where he was standing. He paid for my dry cleaning. I paid for his coffee. And 3 years later, I paid for half of our wedding while he paid for the other half, because that's the kind of marriage we wanted. Equal. Partnership. Together. I built Thornwood Interiors from my kitchen table when I was 24. Jeffrey would come home from the firm at midnight and find me surrounded by fabric samples and floor plans, and instead of complaining, he would make us both tea and ask me to explain my vision. He believed in me before anyone else did. He believed in me before I believed in myself. By the time Adrian was born, I had my first commercial client. By the time she started kindergarten, I had a staff of 12. By the time she graduated high school, Thornwood Interiors was one of the most respected design firms on the East Coast, with projects in Manhattan, the Hamptons, and Palm Beach. I had built something real, something lasting, something that provided for my family and employed dozens of talented people. Jeffrey made partner at his firm the same year I landed my first $1 million contract. We celebrated with a bottle of champagne on our back porch watching Adrienne chase fireflies in the yard, and I remember thinking that this was it. This was the life I had always wanted. This was happiness. We had 32 years together. 32 years of building and growing and raising our daughter and learning each other's rhythms and forgiving each other's flaws. Jeffrey wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But we loved each other with the kind of love that deepens over time instead of fading. The kind of love that makes you a better person just by being near it. When he died, I thought I would die too. It was a heart attack, sudden and massive. He was 61 years old, healthy by all accounts, with a physical exam 3 months earlier that showed nothing concerning. He was at his desk reviewing contracts when it happened. His secretary found him slumped over his keyboard, already gone. They said he didn't suffer, but I've never been sure if that was true or just something people say to comfort the grieving. I sold Thornwood Interiors 6 months after the funeral. I couldn't walk into that office anymore without seeing Jeffrey in every corner, without remembering the tea he used to bring me, without expecting him to call and ask what I wanted for dinner. The company sold for $14 million to a larger firm that promised to keep the name and the staff. I don't know if they kept that promise. I stopped paying attention. The money sits in accounts that I rarely touch. The house that Jeffrey and I built together is paid off, has been for years. I have everything I could ever need and no one to share it with. That's the cruel joke of widowhood, I suppose. You spend your whole life building something, and then the person you built it for is gone. But I had Adrienne, and soon after Jeffrey's death, I had Nolan. My grandson was born 11 months after we buried his grandfather. I was in the delivery room when he came into the world, this tiny screaming miracle with his father's chin and his mother's eyes. Adrienne asked me to be there because Colton was stuck in traffic, he said. Always an excuse with that man. Always somewhere else he needed to be. Nolan became my reason to keep going. Every Tuesday I would pick him up from preschool and take him for ice cream. Every other weekend, he would sleep over at my house, and we would build blanket forts and watch cartoons and bake cookies that we burned more often than not. He called me Grandma Cora because Cordelia was too hard for his little mouth to manage, and every time he said it, I felt Jeffrey smiling somewhere just out of sight. But even then, I could see the cracks forming in my daughter's marriage. Adrienne had met Colton at a charity gala 8 years ago. She was 24, still finding her footing as a graphic designer, still recovering from a bad breakup that had left her doubting her own judgment. Colton was 28, confident, charming, with a smile that could light up a room and a handshake that lingered just long enough to feel personal. Jeffrey didn't like him from the start. There's something off about him, my husband told me after the first dinner where Adrienne brought Colton home. Something calculated behind those eyes. I dismissed it as protective father syndrome. I wanted Adrienne to be happy, and she seemed happy. Colton brought her flowers, opened doors for her, called her his queen. He said all the right things. He did all the right things. And if sometimes his compliments felt rehearsed, if sometimes his charm felt like performance, well, I told myself that was just my imagination. The wedding was beautiful, small, elegant, exactly what Adrienne wanted. Jeffrey walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and I sat in the front row thinking that my daughter had found her person, the way I had found mine all those years ago. I was wrong. The changes came slowly, so slowly that I almost didn't notice them. Adrienne stopped calling me every day, then every other day, then once a week, if I was lucky. She quit her job at the design firm to work freelance from home, which Colton said made more sense for their family. Her friends from college seemed to fade away one by one, and when I asked about them, she would say they had grown apart, that people change, that it happens. Colton was always there, always hovering at the edge of every conversation. If I called Adrienne during the day, he would answer her phone because she was busy, he said. If I stopped by unannounced, he would appear within minutes, smiling that smooth smile, asking if everything was okay. He started referring to my concerns about Adrienne as meddling. He started suggesting that I was having trouble letting go of my adult daughter. He started planting seeds. "Your mother means well," I once overheard him telling Adrienne when they didn't know I was listening. "But she's never really accepted that you're not her little girl anymore. It's sad, really. She can't handle not being in control." The worst part is that Adrienne believed him. She started looking at me differently after that. She started hearing criticism in my questions and control in my concern. She started defending Colton before I even said anything negative about him, as if she was anticipating attacks that I had never planned to make. By the time Jeffrey died, I had already lost my daughter. Not completely, not yet. But the distance between us had grown into something I didn't know how to cross. Colton had built walls around her that I couldn't climb, and every attempt I made to reach her only seemed to push her further away. After the funeral, Colton was everywhere. Helpful, solicitous, always offering to handle things so I wouldn't have to worry. He offered to manage Jeffrey's estate. He offered to help me sell the business. He offered to invest my money for me, because I was grieving and shouldn't have to think about such things. His generosity felt suffocating, but I couldn't say that without sounding ungrateful. It was Edmund who first voiced what I had been too afraid to admit. Edmund Merritt had been Jeffrey's best friend for nearly 3 decades. They had met the day we moved into this neighborhood. 2 men in their early 30s with young families and big dreams, and they had bonded instantly over a shared love of fishing and football and terrible jokes. When Jeffrey died, Edmund was the one who stood beside me at the funeral, who helped me sort through my husband's belongings, who sat with me on my porch during those long, empty evenings when the silence became too much to bear. 6 months after the funeral, Edmund came to me with concern written all over his face. "I've been watching your son-in-law," he said, and something in his tone made me go still. "Old habits die hard, I suppose. 32 years as a detective, you learn to notice things." "What kind of things?" Edmund was quiet for a long moment. "The kind of things that don't add up. The expensive watch that's not quite real. The car that's leased, not owned. The way he talks about money like someone who's desperate for it." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Edmund, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I made some calls, discreet ones, and I think there are things about Colton Stratton that your daughter doesn't know. Things that you don't know." He paused. "I'm still putting the pieces together, but when I have something solid, you'll be the first to know." That conversation happened 18 months ago. In the time since, Edmund had built a file on my son-in-law that read like a catalog of deception. A previous marriage that ended in divorce when his first wife discovered hidden debts. A pattern of financial manipulation stretching back a decade. A complaint filed by a former colleague that was later withdrawn under circumstances that suggested intimidation. And then, 3 months ago, came the request that changed everything. Colton came to me asking for $200,000, an investment opportunity, he called it, a commercial real estate deal that couldn't miss. He had documents, projections, testimonials. He had answers for every question and reassurances for every concern. But I had spent 40 years in business. I knew a bad deal when I saw one. And more importantly, I knew a lie when I heard one. I had Bernard, my lawyer, examine the documents. They were fraudulent. The investment opportunity didn't exist. Colton wasn't trying to make money. He was trying to pay off a debt that had grown beyond his ability to manage. A debt to a man who didn't accept late payments. When I refused to give him the money, Colton's mask slipped for the first time. In my own living room, with Adrian upstairs putting Nolan to bed, my son-in-law looked at me with eyes that held no warmth at all. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "I promise you that." 1 week later, he showed up drunk at my door at 11 at night, demanding money while my grandson slept upstairs. 2 days after that, I changed every lock in my house. And 3 days after that, at 4:47 in the morning, he came back with a sledgehammer. Now, sitting in my living room with my daughter, I prepared to tell her everything. Every lie her husband had told, every debt he had hidden, every manipulation he had used to isolate her from everyone who loved her. I took her hands in mine and looked into her eyes, and I saw the daughter I had raised, the bright, creative, loving girl who had somehow gotten lost along the way. "Adrienne," I said gently, "this is going to be hard to hear, but I need you to know the truth." I started with the documents. Edmund had prepared a folder, organized with the methodical precision of a man who spent 3 decades building cases. He handed it to me, and I handed it to Adrienne, and I watched my daughter's face as she opened it and began to read. The first page was a marriage certificate from the state of New Jersey, dated 12 years ago. Colton Stratton and a woman named Jennifer Mallory, married when he was 24 years old, divorced 3 years later. He told me he'd never been married before, Adrian whispered. He said I was his first everything. Keep reading, I said gently. The divorce filing told a story that felt painfully familiar. Jennifer Mallory had discovered that her husband had accumulated nearly $60,000 in credit card debt without her knowledge. He had taken out cards in her name, forged her signature on loan applications, and systematically drained their joint savings while telling her everything was fine. When she confronted him, he had denied it. When she showed him proof, he had blamed her for not making enough money. When she filed for divorce, he had begged and pleaded and promised to change. She divorced him anyway. It was, according to the notes Edmund had compiled from public records and discreet inquiries, the smartest decision she ever made. Adrian turned the page with trembling hands. The next document was a complaint filed with the Human Resources Department of a real estate firm in Newark, dated 6 years ago. A female colleague accused Colton of harassment after he made repeated unwanted advances and then retaliated when she rejected him. The complaint was withdrawn 2 months later. Edmund had included a note. The woman quit her job the same week and moved to another state. This can't be right, Adrian said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Colton would never. He's not like this. There's more, Edmund said quietly. He was standing by the window, giving us space, but close enough to support. The financial records are toward the back. Adrian flipped through the pages until she found them. Bank statements, credit reports, loan documents. A paper trail that Edmund had pieced together over 18 months of careful investigation, painting a picture of a man drowning in debt and desperate to stay afloat. The numbers were staggering. Colton owed over $180,000 across multiple credit cards, 2 personal loans, and most alarmingly, a private lender whose terms suggested he was not the kind of man who accepted late payments. The debts had accumulated over years, hidden behind shell accounts and lies, growing larger with every passing month. I don't understand, Adrian said. We have a joint account. I see our finances. There's nothing like this. He has accounts you don't know about, I explained. Accounts in his name only. The joint account you see is carefully managed to look normal. But behind it, there's a mountain of debt that he's been hiding from you since before you were married. My daughter looked up at me, and I saw something breaking behind her eyes. How do you know all this? How long have you known? Edmund started investigating 18 months ago. He came to me with his concerns, and I asked him to find out the truth before I said anything to you. I took her hand. I wanted to be sure, Adrian. I didn't want to accuse your husband of something this serious without proof. 18 months. Her voice was hollow. You've known for 18 months that my husband is a liar and a fraud, and you didn't tell me? I tried to tell you. Remember last Christmas, when I asked you if everything was okay with Colton? You told me I was being paranoid. You told me that I had never liked him, and I was looking for reasons to break up your marriage. Adrian flinched. I could see her remembering that conversation, remembering the words she had thrown at me, remembering how Colton had comforted her afterward and told her that I was just jealous of their happiness. He said you were trying to control me, she whispered. He said you couldn't handle that I had my own life now. I know what he said, and I understood why you believed him. He's very convincing, Adrienne. He's had years of practice. Edmund stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Stratton, I've seen this pattern before, many times in my career. Men like your husband are experts at isolation. They separate their partners from family, from friends, from anyone who might see through the facade. They create a bubble where their version of reality is the only one that exists. It's not your fault that you believed him. That's exactly what he designed you to do. Adrian was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at the documents in her lap. I wanted to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew we weren't finished yet. There was more she needed to know. 3 months ago, I continued, Colton came to me asking for $200,000. He said it was for an investment opportunity, a commercial real estate deal that couldn't fail. He had documents, projections, everything. It looked legitimate on the surface. What happened? I had Bernard examine the paperwork. Bernard, your father's lawyer, who handled the estate. He found inconsistencies. The property Colton claimed to be investing in was already owned by someone else. The company he said was backing the deal didn't exist. The whole thing was fabricated. Adrienne shook her head slowly. I don't understand. Why would he need to lie about an investment? If he needed money, he could have just asked. Because the money wasn't for an investment, sweetheart. It was to pay off his debts. Specifically, it was to pay off a man named Victor Brennan, who lent him $70,000 8 months ago at an interest rate that would make a loan shark blush. I pulled out the last document in the folder. It was a recording transcript that Edmund had obtained through means I didn't ask about. A conversation between Colton and Victor Brennan, captured just 2 weeks ago. Adrienne read the transcript with growing horror. In it, her husband begged for more time. He promised that he had a plan, that his mother-in-law was wealthy, and he would get the money from her one way or another. He called me the old woman. He said I was going to pay whether I wanted to or not. He said he had until the end of this month, Edmund added. That was the deadline Brennan gave him. After that, there would be consequences. Brennan was very specific about what those consequences would look like. Adrienne looked up at me with devastation written across her face. He was going to use you, use your money, and when you said no, he showed up at my door a week ago, drunk and aggressive, at 11 at night. Nolan was sleeping upstairs. Colton pounded on my door, screaming that I owed him, that I was destroying his family, that if I didn't give him what he wanted, he would make sure I never saw my grandson again. The color drained from my daughter's face. Nolan was here? You had asked me to watch him while you went to your friend Sarah's birthday dinner. Don't you remember? You texted me to ask, and I said yes, and Colton drove him over that afternoon. I paused. When did Colton tell you he was picking Nolan up? Adrienne's brow furrowed. He said he got him around 8 because you weren't feeling well. He said you called him and asked him to come early. I never called him. I never said I wasn't feeling well. Nolan was asleep in the guest room when Colton arrived at 11, pounding on my door so hard I thought he would break it down. I watched the realization dawn on my daughter's face. Colton had lied about picking up Nolan. He had come to my house in a rage, knowing his son was inside, knowing I would do anything to protect my grandson. He had used his own child as leverage. That's when I changed the locks, I said. The next morning, after he finally left when I threatened to call the police, I changed every lock in this house. I installed cameras around the property, and I told Edmund what had happened. We knew he would come back. We just didn't know when. Adrienne was silent for a long moment, staring at the documents scattered across my coffee table. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and broken. I believed him. Every time he told me you were the problem, I believed him. Every time he said you were trying to control me, trying to break us up, I believed him. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. How could I be so stupid? I moved closer to her and put my arms around her shoulders. You're not stupid, Adrienne. You're a victim. There's a difference. I said terrible things to you. Last Christmas, when you tried to talk to me, I told you that if you couldn't support my marriage, maybe you shouldn't be part of my life. I said that, Mom. To you. I know. And you still protected me. You still spent 18 months gathering evidence and preparing for this moment. Even after everything I said, you're my daughter. There is nothing you could say, nothing you could do, that would ever make me stop fighting for you. Adrienne collapsed into my arms, sobbing like she hadn't sobbed since she was a child. I held her the way I used to hold her after nightmares, stroking her hair and whispering that everything would be okay. And for the first time in years, I believed it might actually be true. Edmund excused himself to make coffee, giving us privacy. We sat together on my sofa as the sun continued to rise outside, painting the windows gold, and my daughter told me everything. She told me about the arguments that always ended with her apologizing, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. She told me about the friends she'd stopped calling because Colton always had a reason why they weren't good for her. She told me about the job opportunities she'd turned down because Colton convinced her that working from home was better for their family, even though it meant she was dependent on him for everything. She told me about the night, 18 months ago, when she'd found a credit card statement in Colton's jacket pocket. A card she didn't know existed, with a balance of $23,000. When she confronted him, he had cried. Actually cried. He told her it was old debt from before they were married, that he was ashamed, that he'd been trying to pay it off secretly so she wouldn't think less of him. He begged her not to tell anyone, especially not me. I believed him, Adrian said, her voice raw from crying. I kept his secret because I thought I was being a good wife. I thought I was supporting him. He counted on that. He knew exactly what to say to make you feel responsible for his problems. She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I had been dreading. What happens now? With Colton, I mean, with the police. He'll be charged with attempted breaking and entering, criminal threatening, and possession of a weapon with intent to cause harm. Edmund says there might be additional charges once they start looking into his financial activities. Fraud, possibly. Forgery, for the loan applications with your signature. My signature? Adrian's eyes went wide. What are you talking about? I had hoped to spare her this part, at least for now. But she deserved the truth, all of it. Some of the loans were taken out in your name, Adrienne. Or rather, in both your names jointly. But you never signed those applications. Bernard examined them, and the signatures don't match. Colton forged your name to borrow money you didn't know about. My daughter put her head in her hands. I'm going to be sick. You're not liable for any of it. Bernard has already started building the case to prove forgery. You won't owe a penny of his debts. That's not why I feel sick, Mom. She looked up at me with anguish in her eyes. I feel sick because I let this happen. I let him into our lives. I let him near Nolan. I defended him to you for years while he was lying and stealing and using me as a shield. Adrian, listen to me. I took her face in my hands, the way I used to when she was small and scared and needed me to tell her the monsters weren't real. None of this is your fault. Colton is a predator. He targets people who are kind and trusting and loyal, because those are the qualities that make someone easy to manipulate. You didn't let this happen. He did this to you. She searched my eyes, looking for something to hold on to. Do you really believe that? I believe it with my whole heart. And I believe that starting today, you have a chance to take your life back, to be the woman you were before. He convinced you that you were less. The sound of the front door opening made us both turn. Edmund appeared in the hallway, his face grave. I just got a call from the station, he said. They've finished processing Colton. He made bail. My blood ran cold. How? How is that possible? He called someone. A friend, apparently, who put up the money. He was released 20 minutes ago. Adrian gripped my hand. What does that mean? Is he going to come back here? There's a restraining order in place. He's not allowed within 500 feet of this property or either of you. If he violates it, he goes straight back to jail. Edmund paused. But men like Colton don't always respect restraining orders. I think it would be best if you both stayed somewhere else for a few days, just until things settle down. I shook my head. I'm not leaving my home. This is the house Jeffrey and I built together. I won't be driven out of it by that man. Cordelia. No, Edmund. I've spent 2 years being careful, being quiet, trying not to make waves. Look where it got us. Colton nearly broke down my door with a sledgehammer while my daughter thought I was the one having a breakdown. I stood up, feeling a resolve settle into my bones that I hadn't felt in years. I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. If Colton wants to come back here, he'll find me waiting. And this time, I won't be alone. Edmund studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then I'll stay too. I can set up in the guest room. If he shows up, we'll be ready. Adrian stood up beside me. I'm staying too. Nolan is with Colton's mother right now, but I'm going to call her and tell her I'm picking him up this afternoon. And then we're coming back here. She took a shaky breath. This is my mother's home. It's where I grew up. And if Colton thinks he can threaten this family, he's going to learn that Thornwood women don't break easily. I felt tears prick my eyes. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter. Not the shadow Colton had created. Not the echo of the woman she used to be. I saw Adrian, strong and fierce and ready to fight. Are you sure? I asked. This isn't going to be easy. Colton won't go quietly. I'm sure. She hugged me tightly. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything. For not listening, for not trusting you, for choosing him over you again and again. You're here now. That's what matters. She pulled back and wiped her eyes. I need to call his mother, and then I need to call a divorce lawyer. As Adrian walked into the kitchen to make her calls, Edmund came to stand beside me. She's tougher than she looks, he said. She gets it from her father. Edmund smiled slightly. I think she gets it from both of you. He was quiet for a moment. Cordelia, there's something else you should know. About Victor Brennan, the man Colton owes money to. What about him? He's not going to stop just because Colton got arrested. The debt is still outstanding. And men like Brennan, they don't care about restraining orders or legal proceedings. They care about getting paid. I felt a chill despite the morning warmth. What are you saying? I'm saying that Colton is desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. He made bail this morning, which means he has a few days before his preliminary hearing. A few days to try to figure out how to pay off Brennan before things get worse. Edmund met my eyes steadily. I don't think he's done, Cordelia. I think we're just getting started. I looked out the window at the property Jeffrey and I had nurtured for nearly 30 years, the gardens he used to tend on weekend mornings, the oak tree where Adrian had her first swing, the driveway where I had stood this morning and watched my son-in-law get arrested. Then we'll be ready, I said quietly. Whatever he does next, we'll be ready. Edmund nodded and put a hand on my shoulder, and we stood together in silence, watching the sun rise on what was sure to be the longest day of my life. The call came at 2 in the afternoon. Adrienne had just returned with Nolan, who ran into my arms the moment he saw me. I held my grandson tight, breathing in the smell of his shampoo, feeling his small heart beating against my chest. He didn't understand what was happening, and I intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. Grandma Cora, why is Mommy crying? He asked, his big brown eyes searching my face for answers. Mommy is just tired, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're tired. How about you go play in the living room while Grandma makes you some lunch? Nolan nodded and scampered off to find his toy box, which I kept stocked with his favorites for exactly these occasions. Adrian watched him go with a mixture of love and devastation that broke my heart. He asked about Colton on the drive here, she said quietly. Asked where Daddy was. I didn't know what to say. You'll figure it out. Not today, not tomorrow. But when you're ready, you'll find the right words. My phone rang before she could respond. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my gut told me to answer. Mrs. Thornwood? The voice was male, unfamiliar, and cold. My name is Victor Brennan. I believe we have some business to discuss. My blood turned to ice. I looked at Edmund, who had straightened immediately at the change in my expression. I put the phone on speaker. I don't know who you are, I said carefully, and I don't have any business with you. Oh, but you do. Your son-in-law owes me a significant amount of money, $70,000 plus interest. That brings the total to just over $90,000 as of this morning. Brennan's voice was calm, almost pleasant, the voice of a man who was used to having these conversations. Colton assured me you would be covering his debt. I'm calling to arrange payment. Colton was mistaken. His debts are not my responsibility. That's not how I see it, Mrs. Thornwood. You see, I've done my research. I know about your lovely home in Greenwich. I know about the company you sold for $14 million. I know about your daughter and your grandson. He paused. Nolan, isn't it? 5 years old. Attends Riverside Preschool on Maple Avenue. The threat was unmistakable. I felt Adrienne grab my arm, her face white with terror. If you come anywhere near my family, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Brennan laughed softly. Mrs. Thornwood, I don't make threats. I'm simply explaining the situation. Colton owes me money. He can't pay. That makes it someone else's problem. And since you're the one with the resources, that someone is you. And if I refuse, then I'll have to find other ways to recoup my investment, ways that might prove uncomfortable for everyone involved. Another pause. You have until Friday. That's 3 days. $90,000 cash, delivered to a location I'll provide. If I don't receive payment by midnight Friday, I'll assume you've declined my generous offer, and then we'll proceed to less pleasant options. The line went dead. Adrienne was shaking beside me. Mom, he knows about Nolan. He knows where Nolan goes to school. We have to call the police. We will, Edmund said, already pulling out his own phone. I have contacts who can trace that call, see if we can get a location on Brennan. But Cordelia, he's right about one thing. Men like Brennan don't make empty threats. If he says he knows where Nolan goes to school, he does. I looked at my grandson through the doorway, happily arranging toy cars on my living room floor, completely unaware that his safety had just been threatened by a monster. Something inside me shifted. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something harder was taking shape, something that felt like steel. "I'm not paying him," I said. Adrian stared at me. "Mom, you heard what he said. He threatened Nolan." "I know what he said. And I know that if I pay him $90,000 today, he'll come back tomorrow asking for more. Men like Brennan don't stop. They squeeze until there's nothing left to take. So what do we do?" I looked at Edmund. "You said you still have contacts in the department. People who owe you favors." He nodded slowly. "A few. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Victor Brennan has probably done this before. Probably to people who didn't have the resources to fight back. I'm thinking that somewhere in his past, there are victims who would love to see him brought to justice." I took a breath. "I'm thinking we don't run, and we don't pay. We fight." Edmund studied me for a long moment, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "Jeffrey always said you were the toughest person he ever met. I'm starting to see what he meant. Can you do it? Can you find something on Brennan that we can use?" "I can try. I'll make some calls, pull some strings. But Cordelia, this is dangerous. Brennan isn't Colton. He's not a desperate amateur playing at being tough. He's the real thing." "I know." I looked at my daughter, at my grandson, at the home I had built with the man I loved. But I've spent 4 years learning how to live without Jeffrey, learning how to be strong on my own. I didn't come this far to let a loan shark and a lying son-in-law destroy everything I have left. Adrian took my hand. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever you need. I need you to take Nolan somewhere safe. Your friend Sarah, the one with the house in Vermont. Can you stay with her for a few days? I'm not leaving you here alone." "You won't be. Edmund will be here. And I need to know that Nolan is somewhere Brennan can't find him. Please, Adrienne, do this for me." My daughter looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll call Sarah. But the moment anything happens, you tell me. Promise?" "I promise." As Adrian went to make arrangements, Edmund moved closer to me. "You know," he said quietly, "there might be another way. Brennan wants money from Colton. What if we give him something better?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that Colton is desperate. He made bail this morning, but he's facing serious charges. And he knows that Brennan's deadline is coming, whether he's in jail or not." Edmund's eyes were sharp. "What if we could get Colton to turn on Brennan? Testify against him in exchange for a reduced sentence?" I stared at him. "You think he would do that?" "I think Colton is a survivor. He'll do whatever it takes to save himself. If we can convince him that cooperating is his best option, he might just hand us Brennan on a silver platter." It was risky. It was possibly insane. But as I looked around at the life I had built and the family I was fighting to protect, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being a victim. It was time to take control. Edmund made the call to Colton that evening. Adrian and Nolan had left for Vermont an hour earlier. I watched them drive away with a mixture of relief and guilt, knowing that my daughter was safe, but hating that she had to run from her own home. Nolan had waved at me from the back seat, his small hand pressed against the window, and I had smiled and waved back even as my heart was breaking. "It's done," Edmund said, ending the call. "Colton agreed to meet, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, at the coffee shop on Main Street. Public place, plenty of witnesses." He agreed? Just like that? He didn't have much choice. I told him we had evidence that could put him away for a decade. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. I may have exaggerated slightly, but he doesn't know that. Edmund paused. "I also told him that Brennan called you." That got his attention. "What did he say?" He went quiet for a long moment. Then he asked if Brennan had made any specific threats. I told him about Nolan, about the school. He cursed under his breath and said he'd be there tomorrow. I sat down heavily in Jeffrey's old armchair. "Do you think he actually cares? About Nolan, I mean? Or is this just another manipulation?" Edmund considered the question. "I think Colton is capable of caring in his own limited way. He's not a complete sociopath. He's just a deeply selfish man who has spent his whole life prioritizing his own needs over everyone else's." He sat across from me. "But whether he cares or not doesn't matter. What matters is that he's scared, and scared people make deals." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed I had shared with Jeffrey for 30 years, staring at the ceiling and running through every possible outcome of the meeting tomorrow. Colton could refuse to cooperate. He could lie, make promises he had no intention of keeping. He could warn Brennan that we were coming after him. Or he could do exactly what Edmund predicted. He could put his own survival above everything else and give us what we needed. By the time the sun came up, I had made peace with whatever was going to happen. I had done everything I could to protect my family. The rest was out of my hands. Edmund drove me to the coffee shop at 9:45. He wanted to arrive early, to scope out the location and make sure there were no surprises. The shop was busy with the morning rush, professionals grabbing lattes before work, mothers with strollers catching up with friends, normal people living normal lives. I envied them. Colton arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was unwashed and disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. The expensive clothes he normally wore had been replaced by wrinkled jeans and a sweatshirt that looked like he had slept in it. For the first time since I had known him, Colton Stratton looked exactly like what he was, a desperate man running out of options. He spotted us at a corner table and walked over slowly, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting an ambush. When he reached our table, he didn't sit down. "Where's Adrienne?" he asked. "Somewhere safe," I replied. "Somewhere you can't find her." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or just wounded pride. I would never hurt Adrienne. Or Nolan. You know that. I don't know anything about you anymore, Colton, except that you've been lying to my daughter for 7 years, and you nearly broke down my door with a sledgehammer yesterday morning. He flinched. That was a mistake. I was drunk. I was scared. I wasn't thinking straight. Brennan's deadline is coming up, and I panicked. "Sit down," Edmund said quietly. "We have a lot to discuss." Colton hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat. Up close, he looked even worse. His hands were trembling slightly, and there was a nervous energy about him that I had never seen before. The charming mask had cracked completely, revealing the frightened man underneath. "Brennan called me yesterday," I said. "He threatened my grandson, mentioned his school by name." Colton closed his eyes. "I didn't tell him to do that. You have to believe me. I would never put Nolan in danger, but you did put him in danger. The moment you borrowed money from that man, you put all of us in danger. Did you think he would just go away if you couldn't pay? I thought I could handle it. I had a plan. Your plan was to get money from me. Money I refused to give you." Colton opened his eyes and looked at me with something approaching desperation. "I didn't know what else to do, Cordelia. I was drowning. I've been drowning for years. Every time I thought I could get my head above water, something pulled me back under. The debts kept growing, the interest kept compounding, and then Brennan started making threats, and I panicked, so you decided to threaten me instead. I wasn't going to hurt you. I just needed you to listen. I needed you to understand how serious this was. I understand perfectly." I leaned forward. "I understand that you married my daughter under false pretenses. I understand that you isolated her from everyone who loved her. I understand that you forged her signature on loan documents and accumulated debts that could have destroyed her credit and her future. And I understand that when your lies finally caught up with you, your solution was to come to my home at 5 in the morning with a weapon." Colton said nothing. There was nothing he could say. Edmund pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. "This is everything we have on you, Colton. The previous marriage, the divorce, the fraud, the forgery. The complaint from your former colleague, every lie you've told, every crime you've committed, documented and organized." He tapped the folder. "When this goes to the prosecutor, you're looking at 8 to 12 years, maybe more, depending on the judge." The color drained from Colton's face. "You can't do this. Adrienne would never let you destroy me like this. Adrienne has seen all of it. She knows exactly who you are now. And she's filing for divorce as soon as her lawyer can draw up the papers." I watched something break behind Colton's eyes. For all his manipulation, for all his lies, some part of him had genuinely believed that he could keep Adrienne under his control forever. Discovering that she had finally seen through him was hitting harder than any threat of prison. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "You didn't bring me here just to show me this folder. You want something." Edmund glanced at me, and I nodded. This was the moment we had been building toward. "We want Victor Brennan," Edmund said. Everything you know about him. How you met him, how his operation works, who else he's lending to. We want names, dates, amounts, and we want you to testify against him in court. Colton's eyes went wide. You're insane. Brennan would kill me. Brennan is going to kill you anyway if you don't pay him. Or worse. Edmund's voice was calm, matter of fact. You have 3 days until his deadline. Do you have $90,000? Silence. I didn't think so. Which means that come Friday night, Victor Brennan is going to send someone to collect what you owe in other ways. And I've seen what happens to people who can't pay men like Brennan. It's not pretty. Colton was shaking his head slowly. You don't understand. Brennan has connections everywhere. He has cops on his payroll, judges who look the other way. Even if I testified against him, nothing would happen. He's untouchable. No one is untouchable, I said. Not with the right evidence. Not with someone willing to testify. You're asking me to sign my own death warrant. I'm offering you a chance to survive. I leaned forward. Right now you have 2 enemies, the legal system and Victor Brennan. You can't fight both, but if you help us take down Brennan, Edmund can talk to the prosecutor. Get your charges reduced. Maybe even get you into witness protection until the trial is over. Colton laughed bitterly. Witness protection. You want me to give up my entire life. What life, Colton? Your wife is leaving you. Your debts are crushing you. You're facing a decade in prison. What exactly are you holding on to? He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The same calculation he had made 1,000 times before, weighing costs against benefits, risks against rewards. Colton Stratton had spent his entire life looking out for himself. I was counting on that instinct now. If I do this, he said slowly, I want guarantees, in writing. The prosecutor agrees to reduce my charges to misdemeanors. I serve no more than 2 years, preferably in a minimum security facility, and my name stays out of the press. I can't promise all of that, Edmund said, but I can promise to advocate for you, and I can promise that without your cooperation, you're looking at the maximum sentence for every charge we can bring. Colton was quiet for a long moment. I could see the war happening inside him, the desperate search for another option, another escape route, but there was none. We had closed every door except the one we wanted him to walk through. There's something else, he finally said. Something I haven't told anyone. Not even Brennan knows I know. Edmund and I exchanged glances. What is it? Brennan keeps records, everything. Every loan, every payment, every person he's ever threatened or hurt. He's paranoid about being betrayed, so he documents everything as insurance. Colton took a shaky breath. I know where he keeps those records. A storage unit in Bridgeport. Unit 247 at Secure Store on Harbor Street. My heart started beating faster. How do you know this? Because I followed him once. After the first time he threatened me. I thought maybe I could find something to use against him, something to get him off my back. Colton laughed hollowly. I was too scared to actually do anything with the information. But it's there. Everything you need to bring him down. Edmund was already pulling out his phone. I need to make some calls. If what you're saying is true, we could have Brennan in custody before his deadline even arrives. It's true. I swear on my son's life, it's true. Those words hit me like a physical blow. On my son's life. The same son whose safety he had endangered. The same son who would grow up knowing his father was a criminal and a coward. But I pushed the anger down. We needed Colton cooperative. There would be time for judgment later. Edmund stepped away to make his calls, and I was left alone with the man who had nearly destroyed my family. He looked smaller somehow, sitting across from me in that coffee shop. The predator I had feared for years had turned out to be prey himself, running from bigger monsters he couldn't escape. For what it's worth, Colton said quietly, I did love Adrian, in my own way. Your way of loving people seems to involve lying to them and using them for your own benefit. I know that's how it looks. But when I met her, I really thought I could be different. I thought maybe with her, I could finally be the person I pretended to be. He looked down at his hands. But I couldn't. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. Then maybe it's time you learned. Edmund returned, his expression energized. I got in touch with a federal contact, organized crime task force. They've been trying to build a case against Brennan for 3 years. If those records exist, they want them. They're sending a team to the storage facility this afternoon. What about Colton? He comes with us, signs a statement, gives a preliminary interview. If everything checks out, we can have him in protective custody by tonight. Colton stood up shakily. This is really happening. I'm really doing this. You are. I stood as well and met his eyes. And when it's over, when Brennan is in prison and you've served whatever sentence the court decides, you're going to leave my daughter alone. You're going to sign whatever custody arrangement she wants, and you're going to disappear from our lives forever. And if I don't, then I will spend every dollar I have making sure you never have a moment's peace for the rest of your life. Colton held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You know, Cordelia, I always thought you were just a rich old woman who couldn't let go of her daughter. I underestimated you. Yes, you did. We walked out of the coffee shop together, Edmund on one side of Colton and me on the other. The morning sun was bright and warm, and for the first time in days, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. It wasn't over yet. There were still risks, still dangers, still so many things that could go wrong. But we had done it. We had found Colton's weakness and used it against him. We had turned my daughter's predator into our weapon against an even bigger threat. And by the time the sun set tonight, Victor Brennan would be in handcuffs. Jeffrey would have been proud. I could almost hear him saying it, in that quiet, steady voice I missed so much. You did good, Cordelia. You protected our family. I blinked back tears and kept walking. The federal agents found everything exactly where Colton said it would be. Unit 247 at Secure Store contained 3 filing cabinets stuffed with meticulous records spanning nearly a decade of Victor Brennan's illegal lending operation. Names, dates, amounts, interest rates, threats made, payments collected. There were photographs of victims who had been beaten when they couldn't pay. There were recordings of conversations that documented extortion and intimidation. There was even a ledger of the police officers and local officials who received monthly payments to look the other way. Victor Brennan was arrested at his home that evening, surrounded by federal agents who had no interest in his local connections. He was charged with racketeering, extortion, assault, and a dozen other crimes that would keep him in prison for the rest of his natural life. When they led him out in handcuffs, he was still demanding to speak with his lawyer, still convinced that his web of corruption would protect him. It didn't. I watched the arrest on the evening news, sitting in my living room with Edmund beside me. The reporter called it one of the biggest organized crime busts in Connecticut history, dismantling a loan sharking operation that had terrorized working families for years. They didn't mention Colton's role in bringing Brennan down. They didn't mention me at all. I was grateful for that. Adrienne called me from Vermont the moment she saw the news. Is it really over? She asked, her voice trembling with hope and disbelief. Is he really going to prison? He's really going to prison, sweetheart, for a very long time. I heard her start to cry, and then I heard Nolan's voice in the background asking why Mommy was sad again. Adrienne laughed through her tears and told him they were happy tears this time. Grandma had fixed everything. Colton kept his end of the bargain. He provided testimony that corroborated the documentary evidence, filling in gaps and explaining the inner workings of Brennan's operation. In exchange, the prosecutor agreed to reduce his charges. Instead of facing a decade or more for fraud, forgery, and attempted breaking and entering, he pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received a sentence of 3 years, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. It was more than he deserved and less than I wanted. But it was enough. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Adrienne got full custody of Nolan, with Colton granted supervised visitation once he completed his sentence and a mandatory rehabilitation program. She didn't ask for alimony or a share of his assets. There were no assets to share, only debts that would take years to untangle. She just wanted to be free of him, and now she was. My daughter and grandson moved back into my house while Adrienne rebuilt her life. She started taking on design clients again, rediscovering the creative passion that Colton had slowly suffocated over 7 years of marriage. She reconnected with old friends who had never stopped caring about her, who welcomed her back without judgment or recrimination. She started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping survivors of emotional abuse, and slowly, session by session, she began to understand that none of what happened was her fault. I watched my daughter come back to life, and it was the greatest gift I had ever received. Nolan adjusted with the resilience that only children possess. He asked about his father sometimes, and Adrian answered honestly but gently, explaining that Daddy had made some bad choices and needed to go away for a while to learn how to make better ones. Whether Colton would actually learn anything remained to be seen, but that was no longer our concern. Edmund became a permanent fixture in our lives. He still lived in his own house next door, but he was at our place so often that Nolan started calling him Grandpa Ed. The first time it happened, Edmund's eyes got suspiciously bright, and he excused himself to check on something in the garden. When he came back, neither of us mentioned it, but I saw the way he looked at my grandson after that, with a tenderness that made my heart ache in the best possible way. 6 months after Brennan's arrest, on a warm spring evening, Edmund and I sat on my back porch watching the sunset. Nolan was inside with Adrian, the two of them baking cookies that would probably be slightly burned but delicious anyway. The sound of their laughter drifted through the open windows. "Jeffrey would have loved this," Edmund said quietly, "seeing his family whole again. He would have loved seeing you as part of it." Edmund turned to look at me. There was something in his eyes that I had noticed more and more often lately, something careful and questioning and hopeful. "Cordelia, there's something I've been wanting to say, something I probably should have said a long time ago." My heart beat a little faster. "What is it?" He took my hand in his, and his touch was warm and steady, just like everything about him. "When Jeffrey died, I made him a promise. I promised I would look out for you, make sure you were okay. I told myself that was why I kept coming around, why I couldn't seem to stay away. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being about the promise. I waited, hardly breathing. I care about you, Cordelia. Not just as Jeffrey's wife, not just as a friend. I care about you in a way that I haven't cared about anyone since Eleanor passed." He paused, and I saw vulnerability in his face that I had never seen before. "I understand if you don't feel the same. I understand if it's too complicated with everything that's happened, but I needed you to know. I thought about Jeffrey, about the 32 years we shared, about the love that had defined my entire adult life. I thought about the grief that had nearly consumed me when he died, and the slow, painful process of learning to live without him. I thought about the man sitting beside me now, who had stood by me through the worst crisis of my life, who had protected my family when we needed it most, who had somehow found a way into my heart without either of us realizing it. "Edmund," I said softly, "Jeffrey was the love of my life. That will never change. But he's been gone for 4 years, and I've spent most of that time just surviving, going through the motions, waiting for something I couldn't name." I squeezed his hand. "I think maybe I was waiting for you to say what you just said." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He leaned in and kissed me gently, and I felt something I thought I would never feel again, the beginning of something new. From inside the house, I heard Nolan shriek with delight and Adrian laugh at whatever mess they had made. I heard the sounds of family, of love, of life continuing despite everything that had tried to destroy it. A year ago, I was a widow living alone in a house full of memories, watching my daughter disappear into a toxic marriage, powerless to help her. I was afraid of my own son-in-law, afraid of losing my grandson, afraid that I would spend the rest of my life on the outside of my own family. Now I sat on my porch with a man who loved me, listening to my daughter and grandson laugh in my kitchen, knowing that the people who had tried to hurt us were facing the consequences of their choices. I thought about that morning 6 months ago, when Colton stood on my porch with a sledgehammer and murder in his eyes. I thought about the fear I felt, the helplessness, the desperate wish for someone to save me. And I thought about the voice that spoke from behind me in that moment, calm and steady and sure. "Let me handle this." It wasn't just Edmund's voice, I realized now. It was something deeper, something that had been building inside me for years, waiting for the moment when I would finally be ready to hear it. It was my own strength, my own courage, my own refusal to be broken by people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. I had spent my whole life building things, a business, a family, a home. And when someone tried to tear it all down, I discovered that I had built something else without realizing it, a foundation strong enough to withstand anything. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Edmund's hand was warm in mine. Inside, Nolan was calling for Grandma Cora to come see the cookies. I stood up and walked toward the light and the laughter, toward the family I had fought so hard to protect, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt completely, perfectly at peace. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with justice. Mine ended with something better. It ended with love.